That 4-year-old beggar girl accuses Millionaire of doing something terrible to her, but he pulls up a chair at the restaurant and does this. Comment. What you think is going to happen? Your opinion is very important, and subscribe to my channel. To support my work, your help is very important. The crash of the glass door against the wall made all the patrons at Bella Italia restaurant turn in shock. It was a quiet Tuesday afternoon in a quaint suburban town in Connecticut, and the most upscale establishment in town was experiencing its usual flow when a little girl with tangled hair and dirty clothes burst into the dining room like a whirlwind. "He did something awful to me," the child screamed, her little words coming out choppy from heavy breathing. "Please, someone help me." Isadora Silva was only 6 years old, but her eyes carried a weight that shouldn't exist in such a young child. Her cheeks were sunken, her arms too thin for her age, and she limped visibly as she walked between the tables, leaving a trail of dirt on her bare feet. Richard Sterling, 52, immediately stood up from his corner booth. As the owner of the largest dairy factory in the region, he was used to solving problems, but he had never encountered a situation like this. His dark suit contrasted sharply with the desperate appearance of the girl. "Hold on, sweetie," he said, approaching carefully. "What happened?" The other customers whispered to each other, some pulling out their cell phones to photograph the scene. Richard noticed the discomfort and quickly pulled out a chair. "Sit here, let's talk." But when Isadora tried to sit down, something strange happened. Her legs trembled violently and she almost fell. Richard steadied her, feeling how fragile her bones were beneath her skin. "Are you hurt?" he asked, concerned. "I haven't been able to walk right for a long time," Isadora whispered, finally settling into the chair. "My grandma said it would get better, but it just gets worse. It hurts a lot." Carol Sterling, Richard's wife, watched the scene from across the restaurant with an unreadable expression. At 48, she maintained an always elegant posture, but her eyes were fixed on the girl with a disturbing intensity. "Where's your family?" Richard asked, sitting down next to Isadora. "My grandma's sleeping under the bridge. She can't get up right either. We haven't eaten in 3 days. The revelation dropped like a bomb in the silent restaurant. Richard looked at the girl more closely and recognized the signs he had learned. During his visits to low-income communities, the severe malnutrition was literally consuming the child's body. "Why did you say that I did something terrible?" he asked gently. Isadora lowered her eyes, ashamed. "I heard Grandma talking to a lady, that the rich man from the factory doesn't like poor kids near his restaurant. I thought if I said you did something bad, people would listen to me and help me." The child's innocent confession touched Richard deeply. Carol approached the table, but kept her distance. "Richard, I don't think we should get involved," she said, her voice controlled but tense. "This is a matter for the authorities." "She's sick, Carol. Look at this child's condition. So what? It's not our responsibility." The coldness in his wife's voice surprised Richard. In 15 years of marriage, he had never seen Carol react with such indifference to a child's suffering. Isadora began to tremble, not just from cold, but from something deeper. Her legs seemed to have no strength at all, and she curled up on herself. "It hurts so much," she murmured. Richard didn't hesitate. He stood up and picked Isadora up in his arms, surprised at how light she was. Too light. "We're going to the hospital. Now." "Richard!" Carol protested, but he was already walking towards the exit. "You can go home. I'll be back later." The drive to St. Vincent's Hospital was tense. Isadora could barely keep her eyes open, and Richard sped as much as he could through the streets of the town. When they arrived at the emergency room, Nurse Doris Sullivan, 35, immediately recognized the seriousness of the situation. "Severe malnutrition," she diagnosed after the initial examination. and there are indications of extremely severe vitamin D and calcium deficiency. Her bones are literally deteriorating. Is it possible to reverse it? Richard asked. With proper treatment, yes, but it will take months, and it's expensive. Very expensive. Richard looked at Isadora, who had fallen asleep on the stretcher. Even sleeping, her face still carried an expression of pain. Do everything that's necessary. I'll cover the costs. Doris stared at him in surprise. Are you related to the girl? No, but that doesn't matter now. While Isadora was being admitted for initial care, Richard called home. Carol answered on the first ring. How is she? She'll need months of treatment. I decided to pay for everything. There was a long silence on the other end of the line. Richard, are you sure about this? A strange child? Carol. She almost lost her life. What about the grandmother? Where is she in all of this? I'll look for her tomorrow. For now, the important thing is to stabilize Isadora. When he hung up the phone, Richard didn't imagine that this decision would completely change his life and reveal secrets that his wife had kept for years. Secrets that would put little Isadora in much greater danger than the hunger that almost consumed her. The next morning, Richard returned to the hospital early, carrying a bag with children's clothes that he had bought on the way. He found Isadora, awake but still very weak, watching the birds that landed on the windowsill. How are you feeling today? He asked, approaching the bed. Better, she replied with a shy smile. Nurse Doris said you paid for me to stay here. That's right. And I'm going to keep paying until you're completely well. Isadora's eyes filled with tears. Why? You don't even know me. Richard sat down in the chair next to the bed, thinking about the answer. Sometimes you don't need to know someone to know it's the right thing to do. Doris entered the room carrying some medication. Good morning, Mr. Sterling. I have news about the case. Go ahead. We were able to locate Isadora's grandmother, Sarah Silva, 67. She's admitted in the public ward 2 wings from here. Malnutrition too, but less severe. Can I talk to her? You can, but she's not very receptive. When she found out that a businessman was paying for her granddaughter's treatment, she became suspicious. Richard sighed. I understand her mistrust. She wants to see Isadora before talking to anyone. Of course. When would that be possible? This afternoon, if Isadora is feeling well. Later, Richard accompanied Isadora to the room where Sarah was admitted. The old woman had disheveled grey hair and a distrustful look that intensified when she saw Richard. Grandma, exclaimed Isadora, stumbling toward the bed. My little granddaughter, whispered Sarah, hugging the girl. How are you? Much better. Uncle Richard is taking care of me. Sarah gave Richard a penetrating look. And what does he want in return? Nothing, Grandma. He's nice. Child, you're too young to understand certain things. Richard took a step forward. Mrs. Silva, I understand your concern. If I were you, I would also be suspicious. Then why are you doing this? Rich man doesn't spend money for nothing. Because your granddaughter was dying, and I can afford to help. And then, when she's well, what will you want? Nothing but to know that she is well, and that you have a place to live and something to eat. Sarah studied his face for long seconds. 40 years on these streets, I've never seen a rich man do charity without wanting something. The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of an elegant woman in the hallway. It was Carol, carrying a bouquet of flowers and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Honey, I came to see how our little protégé was doing, she said, kissing Richard's face. Carol, this is Mrs. Silva, Isadora's grandmother. Nice to meet you, Carol said, but her tone was cold. I imagine you must be grateful for my husband's generosity. Sarah frowned. Generosity that I still don't understand. Of course you understand. A sick child, a man with resources. It's obvious. There was something about the way Carol spoke that bothered Richard. "Carol, are you okay?" "Perfectly. I just thought I should meet the girl's family." Isadora snuggled closer to her grandmother's arm, clearly uncomfortable with Carol's presence. "I don't like her," she whispered to Sarah. "Why not, honey?" asked her grandmother. "She looks at me strange, like she wants to get me." Carol heard the comment and forced a laugh. What an imagination! Children always have these fantasies. Richard noticed that Isadora shrank even more. "Maybe we should go back. Isadora needs to rest." "You can go," said Sarah. "I'll stay here a little longer with her." "But Mrs. Silver, visiting hours are limited," Carol interjected. "Isadora needs to go back to the room." "Who said that? The hospital has rules." Doris appeared in the doorway. "Actually, there's no problem. Isadora can stay with her grandmother until dinner time." Carol seemed upset. "Oh, yes, of course." On the way back, Richard noticed that his wife was strangely silent. "Is there any problem?" he asked. "None. I just think you're getting too involved." "What do you mean?" "Richard, you barely know these people. What if they have ulterior motives?" "Carol, it's a sick child and an elderly woman. What ulterior motives could they have?" "Money. It's always money." The coldness in Carol's voice continued to bother Richard. In 15 years together, she had always been compassionate about social causes. The next morning, when he returned to the hospital, Doris called him aside. "Mr. Sterling, I need to talk to you about something important." "What is it?" "It's about your wife. She came here last night." "Carol came?" "What time?" "Around 11 at night. She said she wanted to check how Isadora was doing overnight." Richard frowned. "But she didn't tell me anything. And there's more. She asked several questions about the girl's health. Very specific questions about the treatment, about how long it would take to recover fully." "What kind of questions?" "If it would be possible to speed up the process, if there would be permanent sequelae, and a strange question about the grandmother, about Mrs. Silver. She wanted to know if the lady would be able to take care of Isadora when she was discharged. And when I said it would be difficult because of Mrs. Silver's age and her own health condition, what did she say? That maybe it would be necessary to find a more suitable family to take care of the girl." Richard felt a chill. "More suitable family?" "Mr. Sterling, I shouldn't be saying this, but your wife asked about the legal procedures for adoption in cases of abandonment." "Abandonment? But the grandmother is here at the hospital." "That's exactly what I said, but she insisted that an elderly and sick woman would not be able to offer the necessary care." Richard ran a hand over his face, trying to process the information. "Doris, do you think—" "I don't want to make accusations, but I thought it was better for you to know." At that moment, Carol appeared at the end of the hallway, walking towards Isadora's room with a bag in her hands. "She's coming here again," Doris murmured. "How often has she been showing up?" "Every day. Always when you're not here." Richard watched his wife approach, noticing something different in her movements, an urgency that wasn't there before. "Honey," Carol called, "what a coincidence to find you here." "Coincidence? I came to bring some toys to Isadora. I thought she was feeling lonely." Richard looked at the bag, then at his wife's face. For the first time in 15 years of marriage, he had the disturbing feeling that he didn't know the woman he shared his life with. 2 weeks had passed since Isadora was admitted, and her recovery was progressing well. Her bones were beginning to strengthen with treatment, and she was already able to walk short distances without pain. Richard visited daily, always bringing something that could cheer the girl up: coloring books, small toys, or fresh fruit. But the more time passed, the stranger Carol's behavior became. "Doris," Richard called one Thursday morning, "how did Isadora spend the night?" "Well, but something happened that worried me." "What was it?" "Your wife was here again last night." This time, she brought an expensive doll and told Isadora that you could be a family. Richard felt his stomach churn. She said that? Yes. And when I asked about Mrs. Silver, your wife said that it would be better if Isadora didn't get too attached to her grandmother because she's old and may not be able to take care of her properly. My God. Mr. Sterling, there's more. Yesterday I caught your wife messing with Isadora's medical records. How so? She was at the nurse's station, flipping through the papers. When I asked what she was looking for, she said she wanted to better understand the girl's health status, so she could help. Richard ran his hand through his hair, restless. That doesn't make sense. Carol has never been interested in children before. Never. We tried to have children for years. We had treatments, consulted specialists. She always said that she had accepted that it wasn't meant to be. She seemed at peace with it. Doris hesitated before speaking. Mr. Sterling, can I ask a personal question? Sure. Is your wife in any kind of psychological treatment? The question hit Richard like a punch. Why do you ask that? Her behavior with Isadora is not normal. She acts as if the girl is already her daughter. Yesterday, when she was fixing Isadora's hair, I heard her calling the girl my love and saying that they would soon be living together. She said that, and Isadora was uncomfortable. She asked where her grandmother would be, and your wife said that maybe it would be better for Grandma to stay in a specialized place to care for elderly people. Richard sat down heavily in a chair. I need to talk to Carol. Mr. Sterling, there's one more thing. What now? Your wife has been pressuring Dr. Evans about Isadora's length of stay. She wants the treatment to be prolonged. Prolonged? But why? She said that it would be safer for the girl to remain under medical supervision for longer. The doctor found it strange because Isadora is recovering very well. At that moment, Dr. Evans appeared in the hallway, his expression serious. Mr. Sterling, I need to speak with you urgently. About what? About some alterations that have appeared in Isadora's file. The three went to a private room. Dr. Evans closed the door and sat down opposite Richard. Mr. Sterling, someone has been modifying the girl's medical records. How so? Symptoms that don't exist have been appearing in the reports. Pains she doesn't feel, weaknesses she doesn't exhibit. It's as if someone wants to make it seem like her condition is more serious than it really is. Richard felt the world spin. Who would have access to these documents? Only the medical staff and close family members with special authorization. What authorization? The one your wife requested last week. She said she needed to closely monitor the case to help with treatment decisions. And you gave her that authorization. Yes, because we understood that you were taking care of the girl. Doris and Dr. Evans exchanged worried glances. Mr. Sterling, the doctor continued, there's something else. Your wife has been constantly questioning Sarah's emotional stability. What kind of questioning? Whether she would be psychologically fit to care for a child. If it wouldn't be better for Isadora to have a more structured home. Richard stood up abruptly. Where is Isadora now? In the room with your wife, Doris replied, and Sarah, she was discharged yesterday. Your wife offered to help find a place for her to stay. What kind of place? A nursing home, said Dr. Evans gravely. She said it would be temporary, just until Sarah fully recovered. Richard ran down the hallway towards Isadora's room. When he got to the door, he heard voices inside. Grandma is in a place where people take better care of her, Carol was saying softly. But I want to see her, Isadora replied, her voice trembling. Soon, my love. When you're fully well, the three of us will live in a beautiful house. You, me, and Daddy Richard. Daddy? Yes, darling. We're going to be a real family. Richard pushed the door open and entered the room. Carol was sitting on the bed next to Isadora, combing the girl's hair. Carol, can I talk to you? Of course, honey. I was just explaining to our Isadora how things are going to be from now on. Our Isadora. "Oh, Richard, after everything we've done for her, she's practically our daughter." Isadora looked confused from Carol to Richard. "Uncle Richard, where's my grandma?" "She's fine, Isadora. You'll see her soon." Carol stood up quickly. "Richard, I don't think it's a good idea. Sarah was very confused when she left here. Maybe it's not the time. Carol, I need to talk to you. Now." In the hallway, away from Isadora, Richard confronted his wife. "What's going on with you?" "I don't understand. You've been acting strangely since you met Isadora. The doctors told me about the modifications to the records, about your late-night visits." Carol laughed, but the sound came out forced. "Richard, I'm just trying to help. I thought you'd be happy that I'm finally showing interest in having a child with us." "But Isadora isn't our child. She has a grandmother who loves her. An old and sick grandmother who can't offer what we can." Carol's voice rose, and some nurses looked in their direction. "Carol, you need to stop this." "Stop what? From finally having the family we've always wanted?" "We never wanted to steal a child from her family." "Steal?" Carol took a step back, her eyes shining with something Richard couldn't identify. "I'm not stealing anyone. I'm saving this girl from a life of misery." It was then that Richard realized something terrifying. His wife really believed what she was saying. In her eyes, he saw not malice, but an absolute and disturbing conviction that she was doing the right thing. The next day, Richard arrived at the hospital earlier than usual, determined to understand what was really happening with Carol. He found Doris at the nurse's station, visibly worried. "Mr. Sterling, I need to tell you something urgent," she said, lowering her voice. "What is it?" "Your wife was here in the early hours of the morning, at 3 in the morning." 3 in the morning? But I was at home. She said she couldn't sleep and went to the living room to watch television. She stayed in Isadora's room for almost 2 hours. When I questioned what she was doing there, she said the girl had called for her during a nightmare. Richard felt a chill. "Isadora called for her?" I asked Isadora this morning. "She said she slept all night and doesn't remember any nightmare." My God, what did Carol do during those 2 hours? She sat next to the bed, whispering things in Isadora's ear. When I approached to listen, she stopped talking. Dr. Evans appeared in the hallway, carrying a folder with a grave expression. "Mr. Sterling, I found something you need to see." The three went again to the private room. Dr. Evans opened the folder on the table. "These are Isadora's original medical records," he said, pointing to some papers. "And these are the records that are in the system now." Richard compared the documents and was horrified. "They are completely different." Yes, in the original records, Isadora was responding well to treatment and could be discharged in a week. In the altered records, she shows symptoms of childhood depression, separation anxiety, and possible psychological trauma related to her grandmother. Trauma related to her grandmother? According to these false notes, Isadora would have shown fear when Sarah was mentioned, and claimed that her grandmother mistreated her. Doris shook her head. "But that's a lie. Isadora loves her grandmother and always asks about her." "There's more," Dr. Evans continued. "According to these modified records, a psychological evaluation would have recommended that Isadora be temporarily separated from her grandmother." "What evaluation?" "There was never any evaluation," Richard exclaimed. "Exactly. But in the papers, it's signed by a psychologist who doesn't even work at this hospital." Richard sat down, trying to absorb the magnitude of what his wife was doing. "Doctor, legally, what does this mean? If these false documents were accepted by Child Protective Services, Sarah could temporarily lose custody of her granddaughter. And then Isadora would be placed in a foster home until the situation was resolved. A foster home that could be us, Richard murmured, understanding the plan. At that moment they heard shouts coming from the hallway. It was Sarah arguing with someone at the reception desk. "I have the right to see my granddaughter. No one can stop me." Richard ran to the reception desk and found Sarah being restrained by a security guard, while a well-dressed woman showed some papers to the receptionist. "Sarah," he called, "what's happening?" "Mr. Sterling, this woman is saying that I can't see Isadora." The woman turned around. She was a social worker that Richard didn't know. "And you are?" "Richard Sterling. I'm the one who's paying for the girl's treatment." "Ah, perfect. I'm Marcia Smith, a social worker. I received a report about possible neglect and mistreatment of the minor by this lady." "What report?" "According to the medical records, the child shows signs of psychological trauma related to the inadequate care she received." Richard looked at Sarah, who was in tears. "That's a lie," the old woman shouted. "I love my granddaughter. I never hurt her." "Marcia," Richard interjected, "can I see those reports?" "Of course." She handed over the folder. Richard immediately recognized the falsified documents that Dr. Evans had shown him. "These reports are incorrect," he said firmly. "How so?" "There's an error in the system. Dr. Evans can explain better." Dr. Evans approached. "Marcia, these documents don't reflect the patient's real condition. There was a mix-up in the records." "Mix-up?" "Yes. Isadora is recovering perfectly and maintains a healthy relationship with her grandmother." Marcia frowned, but whoever made the report seemed very sure of the information. "Who made the report?" Richard asked, although he already suspected. "The answer: Carol Sterling. She said she was close to the family and was concerned about the child's well-being." Sarah looked at Richard in horror. "Your wife did this?" Richard couldn't answer. At that moment, Carol appeared at the end of the hallway, walking hurriedly towards the group. "Marcia, I'm glad you arrived," she said, completely ignoring Sarah's furious gaze. "How are the procedures going?" "Mrs. Sterling, it seems there was a misunderstanding with the medical records," Marcia explained. "Misunderstanding? The documents you provided don't correspond to the child's real condition." Carol glanced quickly at Dr. Evans, then at Richard. "I'm sure there's no misunderstanding. Maybe you're not seeing the whole picture." "Carol," Richard said, his voice controlled but firm, "I need to talk to you now." "Richard, it's not the moment." "It's exactly the moment." Sarah approached Carol, trembling with anger. "What have you done? Why are you trying to separate me from my granddaughter?" "Sarah, you're upset. This only proves that you don't have the emotional conditions to care for a child. I've raised Isadora since she was born. I'm the only family she has." "You were. Now she has us." The comment dropped like a bomb. Everyone fell silent, looking at Carol. "Carol," Richard whispered, "what are you saying?" "I'm saying that Isadora deserves a real family. A family that can offer stability, education, a future, not poverty and neglect." Sarah began to cry. "I never neglected my granddaughter. I did the best I could." "The best wasn't enough, was it?" Carol retorted coldly. "That's why she almost lost her life to malnutrition." Dr. Evans intervened. "Mrs. Sterling, Isadora's state of malnutrition was caused by economic circumstances, not neglect. Sarah was also sick. And that makes her a suitable caregiver?" Marcia looked confused from one person to another. "Well, if the medical reports are incorrect, I need to review the whole situation." "They're not incorrect," Carol insisted, her voice beginning to sound desperate. "You just don't want to see the truth." It was then that Isadora appeared in the hallway, walking slowly with a smile on her face. When she saw Sarah, her eyes lit up. "Grandma!" she shouted, running as fast as her still weak legs allowed. Sarah picked her up in her arms, both crying with joy. "My little granddaughter, how I missed you." "Me too, Grandma. Aunt Carol said you were sick, but you look fine." Carol watched the scene with an expression that Richard had never seen before. Mixture of anger, despair, and something that looked like madness. "Isadora," she called in a sweet voice. "Come here, my love. You need to go back to the room." Isadora looked at Carol, then at her grandmother. "Can I stay with my grandma?" "Of course you can, my darling," Sarah replied. "No," Carol said firmly. "She can't. Marcia, do your job." Marcia hesitated, looking at the child clearly happy in her grandmother's arms. "Well, considering that the medical reports are being questioned—" "The reports aren't being questioned. They're true." Carol took a step towards Isadora, but the girl clung tighter to her grandmother's neck. "I don't want to go," Isadora whispered. "I want to stay with my grandma." The despair in Carol's face intensified. "You don't understand, Isadora. I can give you everything. A beautiful house, pretty clothes, toys. But I just want my grandma." It was then that something broke in Carol's eyes, and Richard realized that the situation was about to get completely out of control. The long Memorial Day weekend arrived in town with all the traditional festivities. It was a special time when the streets filled with parades and celebrations, and St. Vincent's Hospital operated with a reduced staff. Richard had planned to spend Saturday at the hospital with Isadora, who would finally be discharged on Monday. But when he arrived at the hospital on Saturday morning, he found Isadora's room empty. "Doris!" he called, running to the nurse's station. "Where's Isadora?" "What do you mean?" "She was in the room an hour ago," the nurse replied, alarmed. "The room is empty." Doris ran with Richard to the room, confirming what he had seen. The bed was unmade, as if someone had left in a hurry. "I'll check with the other floors," she said, picking up the phone. "Richard!" Sarah's voice echoed down the hall. The old woman walked hurriedly, leaning on a borrowed cane. "Where's my granddaughter?" "We don't know. I just arrived and she's not in the room." "This can't be happening." Dr. Evans appeared running. "I just checked the front desk. Isadora left the hospital at 7 in the morning." "With whom?" "With your wife, Mr. Sterling. She presented a medical authorization for a therapeutic outing." Richard felt the world spin. "What authorization? I didn't sign any authorization. The signature appears to be yours, and there were official medical stamps." "Forged," Doris murmured. "Everything forged." Sarah began to cry. "She took my granddaughter." "I knew something like this was going to happen." "Calm down, Sarah," Richard said, trying to maintain composure. "We'll find her." "How?" "Your wife could be anywhere." Dr. Evans picked up the phone. "I'm going to call the authorities." "Wait," Richard said. "First let me try to locate Carol." He dialed his wife's cell phone number, but it went straight to voicemail. He tried the home phone. No one answered. "Richard," Doris said softly, "there's something you need to know. Last night your wife was here again. She brought a suitcase." "A suitcase?" "She said it was clothes for Isadora to wear on today's outing, but the suitcase seemed too heavy for just clothes." Sarah approached Richard, grabbing his arm. "Mr. Sterling, your wife isn't right in the head. In recent days, whenever she came to visit me, she talked about how Isadora would be happier in a big house with a real mother." "She said that?" "And worse, yesterday she offered me money." "Money for what?" "For me to sign a paper giving up custody of Isadora." Richard closed his eyes, trying to control the anger and despair. "And what did you answer?" "That never in my life would I give up my granddaughter." That's when she got very angry and said I would regret it. Dr. Evans hung up the phone. "The authorities are on their way. But Mr. Sterling, we need to act fast. If your wife really has psychological problems, Isadora may be in danger." "She wouldn't hurt Isadora," Richard said, but his voice didn't sound convincing even to himself. "Perhaps not intentionally," the doctor replied, "but people in a psychotic state can make dangerous decisions, believing they are doing good." At that moment, Richard's cell phone rang. It was a text message from Carol. "We're fine, don't worry. Soon you'll understand." "Where are you?" he typed quickly. The answer came a few minutes later. "In a place where we can be a real family." Richard showed the messages to the others. That doesn't help us much, said Dr. Evans. Wait, Doris said. Yesterday I overheard your wife talking on the phone about renting a house. Rent? Where? I don't know, but she mentioned something about a place. On the outskirts of town, away from the Memorial Day crowds. Sarah stood up with difficulty. We need to find her. Sarah, you're still recovering. I don't care. It's my granddaughter. Richard looked at the old woman, seeing the determination in her eyes. Okay, we'll look together. They left the hospital and began to visit the real estate agencies in town. Most were closed because of Memorial Day, but they managed to find a few open at the third agency. They were lucky. Yes, a lady came here yesterday, said the clerk. Very elegant. She wanted something secluded for a family honeymoon, as she said. Family honeymoon, Sarah repeated, horrified. And did you rent something to her? Richard asked. Yes, a house in the countryside. Route 6, number 245. She paid a month in advance in cash. Richard wrote down the address. How long ago did she go there? It must have been about 2 hours. She said she was going to pick up her family and settle in today. In the car, on the way to Route 6, Sarah didn't stop crying. Mr. Sterling, what if she hurts Isadora? She won't, Sarah. As confused as she is, Carol really believes she's protecting Isadora. But what if Isadora resists? What if she wants to come back with me? Richard didn't answer, because he had the same concern. Route 6 was a dirt road, full of potholes. When they finally found number 245, they saw a simple house painted yellow with a car parked in front. Carol's car. She's here, Richard whispered. They got out of the car silently. Through the living room window they could see Carol sitting on the sofa, combing Isadora's hair. And tomorrow we're going to buy new clothes for you, Carol was saying. Rich, girl clothes, because now you're the daughter of important people. But I want to see my grandma, Isadora replied, her voice small and sad. Don't talk about her anymore, Isadora. She didn't know how to take care of you. That's why you got sick. Yes, she did. She loves me. I love you too, more than she does. Isadora tried to get up from the sofa, but Carol held her arm. You're not going to leave here, my love. It's dangerous outside. I want to go home. You can't. We're a family now. Carol's voice was getting louder, more desperate. Richard looked at Sarah. I'm going in. You stay here, and if something goes wrong, run and call for help. No, I'm going with you. Sarah, it's my granddaughter. I'm going with you. Richard sighed and nodded. They approached the front door. It was locked, but Richard could see a side window ajar. I'm going to go in through the window and try to distract Carol. When I signal, you go in through the front door and get Isadora. Sarah nodded, her hands trembling. Richard managed to enter through the kitchen window without making a sound. From there he could clearly hear the conversation in the living room. You're going to like living with me, Isadora. We're going to have a beautiful life together. I just want my grandma. Forget your grandma. She's good for nothing, it was. Then that Richard heard a sound that terrified him. Isadora began to cry loudly, and Carol shouted, Stop crying! Stop crying now! And then the sound of a slap. The sound of the slap echoed through the house like thunder. Richard didn't hesitate. He burst into the living room, finding Carol standing before Isadora, who was crying on the floor with her hand on her face. Carol, what have you done? His wife turned, her eyes wild. Richard, how did you find us? How could you hit a child, you mean? She wouldn't stop crying. She wouldn't stop asking for the old woman. Isadora ran to Richard, who picked her up immediately. Uncle, Richard, she hit me. I just wanted my grandma. I know, honey, it's okay now. Carol took a step towards them. Give her back to me, Richard. She's my daughter now. Carol, you've completely lost your mind. I haven't lost anything. I've finally found my daughter. It was then that Sarah appeared at the door, panting, when she saw Isadora in Richard's arms. Her tears of relief mingled with tears of anger. Grandma, Isadora cried, reaching out her arms. My little granddaughter. Richard passed Isadora to Sarah, and grandmother and granddaughter hugged desperately. No, Carol shouted. She can't stay with the old woman. I'm her mother now. Carol, you're no one's mother, Richard said, trying to keep his voice controlled. Yes, I am, after our daughter. Carol stopped abruptly as if she had said something she shouldn't have. What daughter? Richard asked, frowning. Carol began to tremble. Nothing. I didn't say anything. What daughter, Carol? Our daughter who... Her voice failed. Who is gone? Richard felt as if the floor had opened up beneath his feet. We never had a daughter. Yes, we did, Carol shouted, tears streaming down her face. 15 years ago, but you don't remember because I never told you. The silence in the room was deafening. Isadora clung to Sarah's neck, confused and scared. What are you talking about? Richard whispered. When we got married, I was already pregnant. You didn't know. I hid it for months, wearing loose clothes. Carol. She was born prematurely. 6 months. She was hospitalized for weeks, but you were always traveling for work. Richard slowly approached his wife. And what happened to the baby? She didn't make it. She was 6 years old when there was the accident. 6 years old. But you said she died premature. No, Carol shouted. She survived. We lived together for 6 years. 6 wonderful years. But you never knew because what? Because I was afraid you wouldn't accept her. She wasn't your biological daughter. The revelation hit Richard like a punch. She wasn't my daughter? No, but I loved her so much. And you were always busy, always traveling. It was easier not to tell. Sarah watched the scene in shock, protecting Isadora with her arms. Carol, Richard said softly, what happened to your daughter? It was an accident. At home. She was playing on the stairs, tripped and... Carol collapsed to the floor, sobbing. It was my fault. I should have taken better care. Why did you never tell me this? Because you were going to blame me. You were going to say I was a terrible mother. Richard knelt beside his wife. Carol, I would never say that. Yes, you would. How could I tell you that I let our daughter fall down the stairs, that I couldn't save her? That's why you always said you had accepted not having children, because I had already lost one. I couldn't bear to lose another, Isadora whispered in Sarah's ear. Grandma, why is Aunt so sad? Because she lost a girl she loved very much, honey. And she thought, you could take her place. Carol raised her tear-swollen eyes. It's true, Isadora. When I saw you at the hospital, so small, so fragile, you were just like my Letitia. Your daughter's name was Letitia? Richard asked. Yes, and she was 6 years old, like Isadora. The same dark hair, the same big eyes. Richard finally understood. That's why you became obsessed with Isadora. I saw a second chance, Richard. A chance to be a mother again, but trying to destroy a family that already existed. Carol looked at Sarah and Isadora, as if seeing them clearly for the first time. I didn't want to destroy anything. I just wanted... Wanted what? I wanted to stop feeling this pain, this terrible pain that I've been carrying for 15 years. Sarah approached Carol with Isadora in her arms. Mrs. Sterling, she said, gently, I understand your pain, but you can't try to heal your wound by hurting other people. I know, Carol whispered. I know it was wrong. But when I saw Isadora for a moment, I forgot that Letitia was gone. Isadora broke free from Sarah and approached Carol. Aunt Carol, do you want a hug? Carol looked at the girl, surprised. Why? I hit you. I was mean to you. Because you're very sad. My grandma always says hugs heal sadness. Carol reached out. Her arms and Isadora hugged her. For a few seconds, both cried together. Forgive me, Isadora, Carol whispered. I forgive you, but you can't take me without telling my grandma anymore. I promise I won't anymore. Richard stood up, running a hand through his hair. Carol, you need help, professional help. I know. And you'll agree to get treatment. I will, I promise. Sarah approached Richard. Mr. Sterling, What's going to happen to us now? What do you mean? With Isadora, with her treatment, after all. Richard looked at the girl who was wiping Carol's tears with her small hands. The treatment continues until she is completely cured. And then I'm going to create a program at my company to help families like yours. Families who need support, but with dignity. A program. Daycare centers for children, vocational courses for adults, medical assistance, everything organized so that people work and are proud of what they receive. Sarah smiled through her tears. Would you do that? Of course. I learned a lot from you. I learned that helping is not giving alms. It's giving opportunity. Carol got up slowly. Richard, I'm going to check myself into a psychiatric clinic. It doesn't have to be inpatient, Carol. We can start with therapy. No, I need intensive help. I need to process my pain in the right way, not by trying to steal the happiness of other people. Isadora pulled on Carol's sleeve. Aunt, when you get better, can you come play with me? At my grandma's house. Carol smiled for the first time in weeks. If your grandma lets me, Sarah nodded. I will. Everyone deserves a second chance. 6 months later, during the summer fair in town, Isadora ran through the central square with other children, completely recovered. Sarah watched from a table next to Doris, who had become a great friend of the family. Richard approached the group carrying corn on the cob. How is she? He asked, pointing to Isadora. Perfect, Sarah replied. Strong, healthy, and happy. And Carol? She arrived from the clinic yesterday. She's much better. At that moment, Carol appeared in the square, walking slowly. Her face was serene, at peace. When Isadora saw her, she ran to her. Aunt Carol, you're back. I'm back, my love. And now I'm okay. Do you want to play square dance with me? Carol looked at Sarah, who nodded with a smile. Sure, Isadora, but then you come back to your grandma, okay? Okay? Richard watched Carol dance with Isadora, seeing how his wife had finally found a healthy way to love the girl, not as a substitute for her lost daughter, but as the special child she really was. Sarah approached him. Mr. Sterling, thank you so much for everything. I thank you, Sarah. You taught me the true meaning of family. What meaning? That family isn't just who you're born with. It's who you choose to be with, in joy and in sorrow. Isadora ran to them, panting and smiling. Grandma, can Uncle Richard come to dinner tomorrow? I want him to try your cooking. Of course, honey, Richard smiled. It would be an honor. As the fair continued around him, he watched that family that had learned to love each other not despite their imperfections, but because of them. And he realized that sometimes the most beautiful endings are not those where everything is perfect, but those where everyone learns to be truly human.